Okay. Let's see if we can get this a little closer.
Are you ready to start?
Yeah, I'm already live on YouTube here.
See if you'll be in it.
Okay.
I need to adjust this or not.
I think this one's good. At least YouTube is good. See if you can set that one. Can you zoom out on that?
No, I think I have to back it up.
See if you can back it up a little bit.
I can't on this box you got.
Here we go. Sorry, just getting set up here. I want to make sure everybody can see the board behind me here, and because we're doing the vertical screen thing here on Instagram, it's going to be a little bit harder to see on that. So if you want the full picture, you might have to jump on our YouTube live. Oh, that's good. Should be able to see. Cool. Well, yeah, busy week this week, so I wanted to jump on here and do a live talking about vertical gardening. So where we farm at 2 homes in the backyard of 2 homes. So we do something called urban farming, where we don't even have a 1/4 acre of land, and we're farming and we're selling our produce to the farmers markets and the grocery stores and the restaurants. And so when you're in an urban environment, you tend to not have a lot of grow space. So one way to get around that is growing vertically, right? If it doesn't have to grow on the ground and it can grow upward, then it leaves a lot more space in the ground for other crops. So today, that's what I wanted to focus on, was talking about vertical gardening. And if you saw some of my videos this week that I did on YouTube, I've posted, I think, 6 videos now about different ways you can trellis your vertical crops. So hopefully that gave you some ideas on how you might be able to trellis your crops. So tonight, what I wanted to do, I wanted to go through what the crops are that you can trellis vertically. We'll talk about some different trellising ideas for different crops. We'll talk about why it's important to grow vertical instead of growing on the ground. And then I'll go through some of the equipment that I use for all the different trellising systems we have here on our plots. So, yeah, so we'll get into it in a sec here. Let me just take a sip of some cranberry water. Cool. So why do we want to grow vertically? So I just talked about, if you're limited on space, growing vertical is a great option. What I noticed with certain crops, if you grow them vertically, as opposed to letting them sprawl out and letting the suckers go, the fruit tends to be a lot bigger, right? Like with tomatoes, for example, if you pick the suckers off of a tomato plant, that the suckers don't branch out, and then the fruit actually becomes smaller because you get more fruit, but the size of that fruit is a lot smaller. What I also noticed growing vertically, you're getting better airflow, right? Because it's growing up, it's not on the ground, where anything that's growing on the ground, you're going to collect a lot of moisture, and it's going to be more susceptible to like disease or insects, because the insects are typically on the ground, and the disease is typically caused, a lot of the disease stuff is typically caused by moisture. So I'll talk about some of the steps you can take, even growing vertically, to reduce the chance for any sort of powdery mildew or anything like that, which is a common thing. A lot of people end up getting powdery mildew the later and later we get into the season. And sometimes that's avoidable because spores are just all around us and they're in the air. And if one plant gets it, sometimes a lot of those plants get it. And then what I also notice is growing vertically, it's a lot easier to harvest, right? Because you're harvesting stuff right in front of your face, where if you're growing on the ground, you're typically having to be on your knees and you're having to pick those crops. So another benefit to growing vertically is it's easy to harvest. And then lastly, the produce. Produce is a lot cleaner, right? So when you do harvest that produce, it's off the ground. So it's going to be a lot more cleaner. And you're not going to get, when you grow stuff on the ground, if that fruit sits on the ground, collects that moisture, and it can cause the fruit to rot. So another good reason to grow vertically. And there's different trellising systems. So that's kind of where I want to lead into next, is talking about some of the different trellising systems out there. So if you watched some of my videos, I kind of went through a bunch of the different trellising systems and what we use here, but there's more even beyond. I just touched the surface with those 6 videos on really how you could trellis stuff. First, I want to go through. So the idea is I was going to draw on the board here each trellis system and then talk about some of the crops that would work good in that trellis system. So the first one I'll talk about it's called the Florida weave. And I actually didn't do a video on this because it's something that I haven't done yet with any of my crops. My crops aren't quite ready for it, but this is a good one for like your eggplant or your peppers or tomatillos. And how I do this trellis system is typically you'll have a stake here, a stake on the other end. And depending on what you use for that stake and the sturdiness of the stake, you might need another one in between to make sure that it's getting its full support. And what you're going to do is you're going to take some string. So you'll just take some string and you'll weave the string. So if here's your tomato plants, say you got some tomatoes in here, they're spaced a foot apart. You take that string and you weave them. So you'll weave them there, then weave them the other side there, then back to this side, and then you'll make it to the middle post eventually. And as these plants grow and become bigger and bigger and bigger, you just keep adding the string. So you weave it on the outside, weave it on the inside, weave it on the outside, and weave it to the post. And you just keep doing this until the plant gets to whatever height you want it to. And these ropes basically support the plant. So as that plant is growing, you're getting the support of the rope so the plant's not falling over and whatnot. And this is a good idea if you're growing. This is a good idea for not those climbing crops. So the crops that want to climb up. This is not a good trellising system for that. This would be good for like eggplant, peppers, this is a good one for tomatillos. And then there's actually a couple different types of tomatoes. There's determinate and semi-determinate tomatoes. And those are tomatoes that aren't meant to be trellised upward. You could trellis them upward if you wanted to, but that's not what they're meant to do. They're meant to be more of a bushing variety. So you could grow some tomatoes this way as well. Just make sure they're determinate. Or semi-determinate. So, and you can figure that out when you buy your seeds or you go to the nursery, wherever you get your plants. Just ask them, ask them what type of variety of tomatoes it is. So if it's a determinate and a semi-determinate, those are good for bushing varieties. So this method, the Florida weave method, would be good. The other method that would be good for any of these crops would just be a tomato cage. You know, there's tomato cages that can be used. Everybody knows about tomato cages. Well, this would be a good option as well. So if you wanted to get, you know, those little tomato cages, you know, you could use the tomato cage for any of these as well. So these are going to be more crops that don't want to climb, but just need the support, okay? And when you're growing these sort of crops, the eggplants, the peppers, the tomatillos, there's these suckers that grow in between the main stem and the leaf. So you'll get your main stem and you'll get a leaf that comes out here. And then you'll get another little stem that kind of tries to get in between those cracks there. So this is called a sucker. And what happens is it prevents the plant from continuing to grow upward. So rather than that plant's energy going up, the energy is going up, and then now it's going over here to this sucker. And the sucker is stealing all of the energy from the plant. So what we want to do with the eggplants, with the peppers, tomatillos are okay. And tomatoes, if you want the tomatoes to bush outward, don't pick the suckers. And that's fine with determinate or semi-determinate tomatoes. You don't have to pick the suckers off. But with eggplant and peppers, if you want them to go upward, then you would just pick the sucker. So you pull the sucker, and then now the plant focuses all its energy on growing up. Now, some other tricks is the eggplant and the peppers, when they grow, there's going to be a first fruit set, okay? So that first fruit set is going to have flowers. So what I typically do with the first fruit set is I pick those flowers off the plant. This will then tell that plant, focus all your energy on growing up, getting tall and big before it starts producing fruit, right? Because if you don't pick that first set of flowers on the eggplant and the peppers, then all of a sudden it's going to start producing fruit, and the plant's only going to be yay big. You want the plant to get nice and big and then start producing fruit, because then you're going to get a lot more fruit, right? So with the eggplant and the peppers, as it starts to grow, gets that first fruit set, pick those leaves, pick the flowers off. That's what I would recommend. And so this is a good option if your crops just need support. You have to imagine, once the plant gets nice and tall, that plant, if it's got a lot of fruit up top here, you know, if it's got all its fruit up here, here's all my tomatoes. Well, now this top is top heavy, so it's going to try to fall over. So that's why you want to support it. So the Florida weave is a good option, or the tomato cage. And tomato cage is a classic. So those are two good options for these crops that I just listed off here. And if you guys have questions, you know, jump in and ask questions as I'm talking about this stuff. Okay, so yeah, so these are kind of these are going to be your options for just support, not necessarily climbing, right? So these are just the plants that are going to need that support. So now let's talk about some different trellising ideas for climbing crops. Before we do that, I want to just talk about this again. All right, so the stake that I have right here, these little lines, these are your stakes. And then I showed you the rope there. But you can use all sorts of different stakes for your Florida weave. And this applies with a lot of the other stuff we're talking about. So here's some rebar. This is a great option for the Florida weave because you can hammer this right into the ground and it'll be nice and supported. Another option is a fence post. And you can see I used a lot of these fence posts when in my videos this week. Another good option would be bamboo. So you can take some bamboo and you can stick those in. And then another good option would just be PVC pipe. PVC pipe, you know, it's more flexible. So it's probably not going to be as sturdy. But you can also use conduit. So electrical conduit, you can get that at the hardware store. And you can just hammer that into the ground. Or you can use like top rail from like fence post. You can go to a fencing supply company and get top rail. And that usually works out just fine too. So with everything we're talking about, these are kind of like the methods you see most people use for the stakes. Okay, so let's talk about like some other trellising methods. Oh, we got a question here. How do you differentiate which are the suckers? I don't want to cut too much off. They're pretty easy to identify. Let me grab a pepper plant and I'll show you. Okay, so here's a pepper plant. Now, I grow a lot of my peppers in these 1 gallon or 2 gallon containers. All right, so if you can see that, you see this one right here. So here's the stem, okay? Here's that first leaf, but you got this guy right here. So this is your sucker. You see how you have your main stem, and then this is your sucker coming out here. And what has it got on it? It's got a little flower, and that flower will turn into a pepper. But if you can stop that from happening, then the growth will continue upward, right? And you can see I've got some additional flowers on here. So all you do is, you pick these flowers off. This is your first fruit set. And we pick our sucker. So here's that sucker. You can see here's more suckers. There's another sucker there. I mean, it'll be pretty obvious. Here's another sucker. And you just go down and you just pick all the suckers off the plant. And then when you get to the top, you'll see all the little fruit. You can see that maybe. There's some little tiny ones. So the earlier you can get them, the better. So I just come up here, I pick them all off. Now, this will mean that you're going to get a later harvest of peppers, but that's okay because the peppers are going to produce way more than if you did nothing and just let it fruit, because the plant's going to be bigger, it's going to have a better root system, so it's going to be able to produce peppers at a quicker rate. So that's what I would do with your peppers, just to give you an idea. And the same thing applies with like your tomatoes and your eggplant. They'll all look the same. You'll have those suckers, and you just pick the suckers off, and then everything will continue to grow up. You'll notice the same thing with cucumbers. You'll notice the same thing with vining versions of squash. So if you want your squash to vine up, your winter squash or summer squash, you got to find a variety that vines out. Winter squash, there's a lot of varieties out there that actually vine out. So if you wanted to try to grow those stuff vertically, you could. Melons you can grow vertically. Same deal. You just pick the suckers and then you focus all the energy on that main stem, and that's what will continue to grow in that upward direction. Okay, so we talked about the Florida weave. We talked about the tomato cages. Those are kind of like the first two. And then let's talk about the hog panel or cattle panel. So you can get one or the other. Now you can use this in a bunch of different ways. That's why it's so great for the garden. I built a fence in my video, so I had my fence posts like this, and then I just had my hog panel going across. And then I just plant my plants right here. Okay, so then as the plants grow, I use a clip and I clip them onto the hog panel fence. Now I'm using a hog panel. You can use a cow panel, a cattle panel, which is going to be a lot better because it's going to be taller. So that's one way you can use it, is build a fence like this. The other way you saw in the video is I did a arch with it. And how I did the arch was I had a stake here, a stake here, a stake here, a stake here. And that was kind of my arch. And then how I attached these stakes to the cow panels is with this fence wire. So this is just galvanized fence wire. You take this, you wrap it around your fence post, and then wrap it around the hog panel. Same thing up here with the arch trellis. You'd wrap it around these fence posts to the arch, and then you've got two systems set up. Now, let me grab something. All right, so I'm going to do a video on this later on, but I'm excited to show you some attachment methods. So to attach the tomatoes or whatever you're trying to grow vertically to the actual structure, you can use these tomato clips. They call them tomato clips, but you can use them with cucumbers and really a lot of stuff. As long as the stem isn't like massive, you can clip these onto the stem and those work good. But I like doing it the free way. And I drink a lot of celery juice. And when you drink your celery juice, you always end up with these bands, right? There's always a band around your celery juice. Well, you can use your band from your celery as a way to clip the plant onto the trellising system, right? So this is a free method. I know everybody has these clips in their kitchen and they probably typically throw them away. So don't throw them away, start saving them. And as you're trellising stuff up to attach it to the structure, use this band from your celery, right? So that is how I basically use my hog panel or cattle panels. The other method, which I showed in the video, was clothesline method, where I just have a clothesline going across. Then I have posts, 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 something like that. And then I use this rope. I tie it to a ground staple. You can get these at the hardware store. I stick this in the ground. I tie this to that. and then I tie it to the top of the clothesline. So I'll put my staple in here and then tie it to that, and then the tomato will just, it'll grow up and trellis around the rope. So that's another great method. So hog panel fence, arch, clothesline trellis, and then I showed you guys the T-trellis system as well, which is where you basically are just taking a PVC T. You can buy PVC T at the local hardware store, and you put it on the end of a fence post like this. So you take a fence post, and on the end of the fence post, you put your T, and then you take like some PVC pipe or some conduit or some bamboo, and you stick this in that PVC T, and then you tie your plants up to that T. So if I was using the same method here with this one, I would take my T and I would put a T on each one of these ends like that. And then I would either use bamboo or I'd use PVC, and it would look something like that. And then same idea is you would basically use this rope. You would use the staple, and then you would just trellis it up to that bamboo or the PVC pipe or whatever you end up using. Right? So some pretty easy methods here. I mean, they don't cost a lot. So when you're going to the local hardware store, I think this fence post costs like around $6. So it's not expensive. And then the PVC pipe, you can get a big thing of PVC pipe, and I use a 1/2 inch. You can use 3/4 of an inch, and they'll cut it for you there, or you just get a big sheet of it and you let it just hang out your window as you're driving. But that's a very easy method. I use bamboo because there's bamboo growing in my backyard here, so I have a ton of bamboo, so I tend to use a lot of that. But if you don't, there's a ton of other ways you could do this. But yeah, it's cheap. $6 for the fence post. PVC is maybe like $10, and then you buy some rope. You can buy this pretty much at any store. And then the ground stakes, they come in a pack. They're cheap. So I mean, all in all, that this method is, under $50 total, and you'll be able to trellis all your tomatoes and cucumbers and anything you want to trellis up. This is a good method for you. And then there's the TP trellis. The TP trellis is just taking. This could even be done with sticks. So it's like that. You tie some rope around the top here, and then you have your crops trellis upward. So that's a really easy method too. You can use really anything. You could use PVC pipe. You could use rebar. You could use conduit. You could use bamboo. Bamboo is what I use. So that's another method. When we were growing up in a greenhouse up at the property, we used airline wire, and this was for a greenhouse. So if you're in a greenhouse and want to do it in a greenhouse, in a greenhouse, it's very similar to this. All I do is I take airline cable and I run it from one side of the greenhouse to the other, and then I just trellis everything upward. And then the other method is trellis netting, where you could do something like, you have your stake, probably have to stake them more close together to work with the netting. And then you just have something over the top. You could probably use the T's again. and then you attach everything to the top, and then you just buy mesh netting. You just have the netting come down and you clip everything onto your supports. This is a great method for good method for like beans or peas. You could do this for beans or peas. That would be a good idea for those. So hopefully this gives you some different trellising ideas. This is all for climbing crops. So the climbing crops are going to be different than the crops we talked about at the beginning of the video. Because at the beginning of the video, we were talking about crops that just need some additional support because they become top heavy because of all the weight that is then on the top of the plant. So with this, it's basically going to work for all your climbing plants. So the climbing plants, those plants are typically, you got, let's see where I got some room here to write. Tomatoes. With the tomatoes, you want to make sure that if you are doing this, that you do it with the indeterminate varieties. The indeterminate varieties are going to be the varieties. Let's do it on this side so you can see on Instagram. So tomatoes. And then you're going to want to get the indeterminate variety of tomatoes instead of the determinate or the semi-determinate. These are meant more for trellising upward, like what we're talking about. They're meant for climbing, where the other ones are more meant for bushing. So definitely get an indeterminate variety. And then what you're going to do with your tomatoes is pick those suckers. Same deal I just showed you with the peppers. You're going to have your main stem, a leaf, and then you're going to have your sucker coming out in between. Pull those suckers, and then everything will grow upwards. Stay on top of it, though, because if you do pull suckers too late, the plant then becomes more susceptible to disease or insects getting in that little area where you plucked it. So you definitely want to be on top of that. Another good one is cucumbers. So tomatoes, cucumbers, same deal with the cucumbers. Pick the suckers. With cucumbers, what I typically do is you'll have like a cucumber plant growing, right? And you'll have your first flowers at the bottom here. And then you'll have your second one, third one, fourth one, fifth one. And what I'll typically do is I'll pick the bottom ones, like the first three. And then after I pick the first three flower sets and I pick all the suckers that come along with it, I let this one go. And then this one is the second one. So first, second, and I pick the second. Right? So I do every other one. So then this next one, this will have a flower. And I don't pick it. So third one, I leave. So every other one I leave, and then I pick the first one I leave, second one I pick, third one I would leave, fourth one I would pick, and you just keep going on up the vine. This way, you're giving the plant enough energy to focus on the growth of that first one before it has to move to the third one. So that's how I would do my cucumbers. Then you got pole beans. Pole beans are pretty easy to do. I typically direct seed my pole beans, and you want to get pole beans, not bush beans. But if you do get bush beans, try that first method that I showed you, the Florida weave or the tomato cages. Those will work good with the bush beans. But we're talking about pole beans. Pole beans are different from bush beans because the pole beans grow upward and they vine. So if they're growing upward and they vine, you basically just want to set them up with one of these trellising systems and let them go. We're doing our pole beans on this arch. This year, I've got some on the TP method. You could interplant them if you wanted to in between your tomato plants and let them trellis up those same tomato plants. The other one is peas. Peas is pretty easy. You don't have to do really anything, no sucker picking or anything like that. Just give them an area to trellis up, and they'll start trellising up that. Some other ones. So these are kind of the main ones that I grow vertically. These are my main ones. But then I have tried doing melons. With melons, you have your main vine. You want to pick the suckers just like you would any other plant. With melons, I use that same method I do with the cucumbers. So I always skip a flower set and then I let the next flower set go. With melon, if you want a nice, big, juicy melon, then you can actually pick all the flowers off and just leave room for one melon, because then all the energy will go towards that one melon. Where if you're growing multiple melons on a vine, which you could, they're just going to be smaller melons, right? Because all the energy that of that vine is not going towards one melon now, it's going, say, towards three. But if you end up doing three, skip flower sets as you're doing it. And then if you wanted to end, like if you wanted to completely end the plant, you could cut the top of the vine out, and then it would start branching out. And then you can just keep picking those branches, and then all that energy won't go towards growing, it'll grow towards fruiting. So that's another trick with melons. But yeah, melons you can grow vertically. Pumpkins, these are like small pumpkins, not big pumpkins. Small pumpkins, small melons. And what you'll have to do is you'll have to figure out how to keep them secure so they don't just fall out. They make these little hammocks. You can purchase hammocks that you can tie onto these different trellis systems, and then you put the little melon in the hammock. So then the weight of the melon won't pull that vine down. That the vine is now supported because you've got this little hammock that you're working with. So that's what I would do with the melons. I would do that with pumpkins. Now there are summer squash and winter squash. I don't really do summer squash like this, but I would do some winter squash. There's a lot of vining winter squash varieties, so find yourself a vining winter squash variety. Same deal as the melons and the pumpkins. Pick those suckers off. Focus on what you want to grow. Do you want to grow a bunch of small squash, or do you want to grow one big squash? And most of the time when you're doing any sort of vertical gardening with these crops, you go for the smaller stuff, because you're not going to be able to hold on to something nice and big in one of these trellising systems. So so that applies for winter squash, pumpkins, and melons. Stick to like small stuff. Skip the fruit sets. Pull those flowers. Really focus on like three sets of fruit on each vine. That's what I would do. Now there are some other ones that you can grow as well, that are kind of outside the normal stuff you see in a garden. So you could do Malabar spinach, which is like a Malabar spinach, which is a good spinach. It's a summer spinach, which is great because you can't grow a lot of spinach during the summer months. So it's a way to still get your spinach in. Another good spinach that grows in the summer, this isn't like a vertical thing, but New Zealand spinach. We've been growing that for a very long time. So because we've been growing it for so long, it grows kind of wild. So it just grows all over the place here. The other thing is loofahs. So loofahs are like you use them to bathe yourself, right? So you could actually grow those, and those are a vining crop. Some fruits that you could grow. Let's see if I got some room up here. Some fruits that vine, passion, fruit, kiwi, grapes, chayote. Chayote is a good one. And then one that I was that my buddy John was growing over at his food forest that we really liked. It kind of tasted like cucumber. Was it's called Pepno Dulce. I'll write it out here in case I was butchering the spelling on that. Pepino Dulce. Yeah, and that's a good one. I never really tried growing it, but I saved some seeds, so I am gonna try to grow it. And that one's a vining crop as well. Plus, you got all the berries. You know, a lot of berries will vine, but the problem with berries vining is if they're vining and you're walking by them and they have thorns, the thorns prick you, which isn't fun. But if you can find some thornless ones, those always work. But yeah, lots of fruit. And what's cool about fruit is it's there. It doesn't, it comes back every year, so you're not having to replant the same crops in that same bed every single year. Grapes are an awesome one. Yeah, that would be kind of my top pick. My buddy John, he has a food forest here in Berkeley. Hey, what's up? What's up, Hudson? What's going on, dude? Thanks for joining. Yeah, so my buddy John, he's got a food forest in the Berkeley Hills here, and I've talked about him before because we were over there on a Thursday before I did a live, and he's got just under an acre, and it's just covered with fruit trees. And how he does it is he has a lot of these vining fruits like the passion fruit, the kiwis, the grapes. He has that stuff actually growing up into the trees, and from tree to tree to tree to tree, and then the crops kind of like fall down. So yeah, it's amazing how much you can grow in such a small space. Hey, Hudson, welcome. Good to see you. Yeah, so that would be kind of the crops that I would list out, and those are some of the trellising methods that I would use. Hopefully, this kind of clears things up on vertical gardening and what it's all about and how to do it. And it's something we've always done with a lot of our crops. So a lot of our tomatoes and cucumbers, peppers, eggplant. I mean, we're always doing it. You kind of have to if you're doing it on a large scale, like we were. And when we were growing up north, we had a 25-foot greenhouse. Like the peak was at 25 feet. And we had tomatoes that actually grew all the way up to the top and then came back down. That's how big they were. So in a greenhouse, you can control the environment a lot better, and you can really get some of those crops to take off. So yeah, and then I had some questions this week from people through Instagram and some of the YouTube videos. People were asking questions, so I thought I'd share some of those questions with everybody. Feel free to ask me questions about what we just covered. So if you do have questions about any of these climbing crops or any of the support crops, just put a little question in the chat there. And then I'll just talk a little bit about some of the questions that came up. So Marlon Health Warrior, he asked, did you watch Back to Eden Gardening? And do you use no-till method? So if you guys haven't seen the Back to Eden video, it's on YouTube. You can find it on there. And it's basically about this guy who lives up in Washington, and he is using kind of not a lot of work method, right? So he's instead of working nonstop to fertilizing he was mainly doing trees, but there's some videos out there of people doing veggies using this method too. His method was just getting a lot of wood chips, bringing in a ton of wood chips, and then putting the wood chips on all of his fruit trees and in some of his veggie beds. And he had great success because, if you look at how a forest works, right, you have the forest floor. And what is the forest floor full of? It's full of, bark. It's full of leaves. It's full of, insects that break down that stuff. And as it's breaking down, it creates this mycorrhizal fungus. And that fungus is what is responsible for feeding the plant's root system. So in a forest system, what this guy was doing was basically taking the forest floor and bringing it out to the field. And that's what we did up at the property. We did no till. We didn't till the land at all. We basically went next to a riverbed and found sand. We went into the forest and found our dirt. And then we had compost that we hauled in from a compost yard that was 100% animal product free. And we brought all that out to the field. Now, once we brought all that stuff out to the field, we knew it was good stuff because, as you were digging the stuff up, you saw these white hairs on a lot of the dirt. So we knew it was fungal dominant from all the wood chips falling from the trees and all the leaf mold and all that stuff. So we pulled it out to the garden beds and we didn't till at all. We basically just took wheelbarrows and dumped it directly onto the beds. Up there, we were growing on an old riverbed, so I could only dig about 6 inches down before I hit rock. So I really had no option. All I could do was do no-till. And we had a lot of success. Everything grew very well. But here in an urban environment, here in the city, we don't have these things. So if you've watched some of my videos, I've shown you guys how you can find these same things in a city, right? You go to a landscape supply company, you get your compost, you get your sand, and you bring that in, and then you've probably already got soil on the spot that you're planning on planting your crops. And when you start a bed, you should till the bed when you start it, because you really want to loosen up that soil and get the sand in there and get it mixed with the clay and get the compost in there. So, when you're first starting a brand new bed, I suggest tilling, but not like deep till. It's like the top 6 inches. You just, take a pitchfork and turn those top 6 inches of soil, loosen it up, and then add your ingredients onto that new bed. Up north, we couldn't do that. So we just had to do completely no-till. We didn't really have an option up there, but, I'm going to do a garden tour video real soon because everything is looking really healthy and looking really good here. Or I'll tour both plots. So I'll show you this plot and I'll show you the other plot. So you can kind of see what I have going on. But here I put in an orchard this year, and I brought in a garbage truckload of wood chips. And I put the wood chips in the walkways. And what I do with the wood chips in the walkways is the wood chips will eventually break down in those walkways, and I can dig the walkways out and flip that onto the bed. So it's like I'm composting in my walkways. And then once that stuff is composted, I'm digging it up, which is creating a swale, which captures any sort of water that ends up happening during the winter months. So, and then the wood chips in the orchard, I have wood chips all over the wood, the trees. I think that you absolutely need to do that if you're planting an orchard. You should be using wood chips. I mean, if you can get them for free, use them, and use them in your walkways. And you see what I do in my, if you've been watching my videos, then you've seen what I do in my beds before that canopy is created. I take any sort of debris. So if I cut out a bed of arugula, I throw all the arugula scraps right back onto a bed, and I just feed the soil that way. So we're constantly feeding the soil. You're feeding the soil with the wood chips. You're feeding the soil with any sort of green waste, any leaves. You know, the leaves will break down, create mold. That mold is good for the plants. So it's important to always feed your soil, and especially since you're growing veganically, you're not using any animal products. So we need to get every mineral and vitamin we can from the stuff around us. And that's also why I make compost teas, which you saw the video last week. You got to see what that was about. All right, so we got a newbie here, Amanda. Hey, Amanda. Thanks for jumping on this. Glad to have you here. So what's the sand for? She's a newbie. So the sand, you know, the sand is very important. The sand is going to be good for drainage. The sand heats up, so it's going to get the soil hot a lot quicker. The roots are going to have an easier time moving through the soil with the sand. You're going to get air in there with the sand. But most importantly, that sand is important because it contains silica. Silica is what's in sand. And in nature, right? Let's pretend you're looking at the top of a mountain, and that mountain has a river streaming down it. Well, rocks fall in that river, right? And then they tumble down the river. Okay. And as they're tumbling, they're breaking down. And then eventually, when those rocks end up all the way down at the beach, or end up all the way down at the end of the stream, you see nothing but sand, right? So what silica is just a bunch of different rocks that have been broken up and broken down going down the river. But what's in a riverbed? You have the river, and the river has all these minerals and vitamins in it. It's got the algae in it. You've got a lot of other stuff, like you've got, you know, fish that are in that river, and they're doing stuff in the river. You've got leaf scraps, you've got tree branches, you've got everything in that river, which all contain minerals, which then end up in that sand. But sand is also silica. Silica attracts energy. There's energy all around us here on this planet. And most people don't know why sand is so important in a garden. Well, it is because it harnesses that cosmic energy that surrounds us here on this earth. So the cosmic energy is energy energy from the moon. It's energy from other planets. There's energy that gets sent down to earth here. And silica is like the conductor. It conducts and brings in that energy and gives it to the root system of the plant. So sand is super important. I use it in everything. So that's what I would say to the sand. You can get that at a landscape supply company. Ask for river sand. And with sand, I always mix that in my pots, grow bags, pots. I mix it into the soil as well. So you just turn the soil and mix it right into the soil. If you're growing certain crops, you can add more sand than compost. So if you're growing peppers or potatoes or sweet potatoes, Or if you're growing crops that like heat, like melons, love heat, you can put more sand in those beds because the sand is going to heat up those beds and allow that plant to have better success if you're in a cold area. Hey, Kelly, you had a question I never got back to you on. You asked me this week. What was that about? I think she asked me what.
How much I got back to her.
Oh, you got back to her. Okay.
How much compost tea for a grow bag?
So her question was how much compost tea for a grow bag. So if you saw the video I did last week, it was all about compost tea. Compost tea is another important piece of the puzzle. I showed in last week's video how to make your own compost tea brewer, all the ingredients I put in my compost tea. If you go find that video on YouTube, I actually also updated that video. So now there's in the description below, there's a link to every single thing that you need to make your own compost tea. There's links to all the different products that we use. You know, I put the links in there. We have an Amazon page, but we don't really care. We don't really like Amazon. So feel free to, if you find it cheaper somewhere else, don't feel obligated to purchase it because, you know, we get a little kickback on it. It's really nothing. We, you know, make $1 off of something that you might pay $60 for. So it's like, not even, you know, in our eyes, it's just, we have the Amazon page. So you know where to, you know, the products we use and you know where to find them, but you don't have to get them from Amazon. We don't really like Amazon and want to support them. So, you know, feel free to get it wherever you can find it. No big deal. But there's a list in that video from last week of how to make all this stuff. So go check that out. And the compost tea, it's, oh yeah, that too. So with Kelly's question was how much compost tea should I put in each grow bag? And she had I think it was like 12 grow bags or something like that, Kelly. So what I told her to do was put about 16 ounces in each grow bag, and that should be enough. I do it weekly, so once a week I make compost teas, and then I feed it to my plants. Peppers and eggplant are especially important if you're growing those, that you give them some compost tea because they do grow a lot quicker and you get more fruit from them. And peppers always seem to grow really slow, really slow. So if you give them a little of that juice, then it really pumps them up. And yeah, so what I make is 5 gallons. So that's what we had told Kelly to do, was just put 16 ounces per plant. Whatever's left over, just keep in the brewer and brew it again next week, or you know, something like that. And then we use an aquarium pump to get the oxygen into the tea, and that we typically run that for 24 hours. So the tea will be brewed for 24 hours. And then after it's brewed, we use a sprayer. We use Field Keen, that's the brand we use, and then it's a 2-gallon sprayer. So then we'll use that and we'll spray it on all the plants. You don't have to get the sprayer. You can literally just take a mason jar and you know, dump a mason jar at the base of your plants. That works just fine too. Okay, let's see. What did Kelly just say here? Yeah, so 24 hours and you should be good. So yeah, anybody have any more questions? What was the other question, Ashley? Oh, okay. So the other question was about, there was someone that had blossom end rot on some of their tomatoes. Blossom end rot is where the butt end of your tomato looks like it's like molding, like there's like a rot on the bottom, and that's called blossom end rot. And that's typically caused by fluctuations in watering. So if you're not staying on top of watering it, every day, or if it gets really hot all of a sudden and you forget to water, that could be a reason that you get blossom end rot. But the fix for that is you need to add calcium. What I usually do is I add calcium and magnesium. I'm feeding that to my plants every day anyways. But calcium you can get from limestone. So what you could do is you can mix some of the Epsom salt and you mix some limestone together, and then just put that at the base of your tomato plants, and then the tomatoes will uptake that, and that blossom end rot will go away. Another option is you can get that tea. I use a tea called CalMag by General Organics. It's called CalMag, and so you can buy the CalMag. You can make that in your compost teas, or you don't have to make it in a compost tea, and you can just put a little of that at the base of the tomatoes, and that's got calcium and magnesium in it. So that's a good option for you as well. But that's what causes blossom end rot, and that's kind of the fix is you need to get calcium, and magnesium will help the plant take up more calcium as well. So that's why I always mix the Epsom salt with the calcium, as they kind of work in unison. So yeah, that's what I would do in a situation like that. And usually that happens once your tomatoes are really starting to come in. So it's a question that we seem to get a lot is, the blossom end rot thing. So hopefully that helps everybody out there. If you do come across some blossom end rot, the fix. And limestone you can get at any nursery, and that's got the calcium you need, and just sprinkle it at the base. You can mix it in your monthly fertilizer. So when you fertilize your crops once a month, add some limestone in there. I always add Epsom salt in my mix. So when I'm fertilizing that once a month with all those amendments that I talked about in the amendment video we did, I always throw a little Epsom salt in there, and I always throw a little limestone in there. So I never really come across issues like that with the blossom end rot, but I did my first couple years and I figured it out pretty quick. And the blossom end rot will happen with squash too. Summer squash, you'll get some blossom end rot, maybe even winter squash as well. So you just want to make sure that cucumbers, I've had it with cucumbers. So just make sure you're giving your plants enough of that calcium and magnesium. Cool. Well, if there's no more questions, I think I'm going to call it a night. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. I had done a bunch of videos this week on vertical gardening, vertical trellising. So go watch some of those videos. Reach out to us if you have questions this week on anything. I think the video I'm going to put out this week on that gardening channel is going to be about how to make the compost tea brewer. Seem to be getting a lot of questions about the compost tea brewer and how it all comes together. So this week I'll put out a video on how to make a compost tea brewer, which is awesome. It's a very easy setup, and you'll see that in the video. So everybody will be able to just buy 2 buckets and turn that into an awesome compost tea brewer and brew your own teas. And then we'll have a video on that root life, which is our other channel. And on that channel, we'll have a video with Josh. Josh has shared with us his healing story, so we wanted to share it with everybody out there. And this week we'll have one, and it's going to be about what he typically eats in a day. So you'll get to see Josh was dealing with Crohn's and colitis and IBS and GERD and Ehlers-Danlos. So he's got quite the healing story, and he's going to share how he fixed all of his gut health issues using medical medium information. So if you're new to the channel, go check out that root life. That has been our channel for the last 2 years. And then that gardening channel is a new channel. It's we created it to help beginners start their first garden. So that's why we're doing these lives, and that's why we're sharing these videos. We want everybody to learn how to grow their own food. So if all of a sudden we're having problems in the grocery stores where you can't find some of those foods, well, you can grow them yourself, right? So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Reach out to us if you have questions this week. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next week.